Alrighty, welcome everybody. We'll give it a minute we'll give it a minute just to let people log on. There. All right, let's have a quick look at all right. Yep, here we go. Starting now. Alrighty, thank you everyone. It's great to see you here. This is the second webinar of our three-part webinar series, The Politics of Power. CFAL Nigeria is hosted by Rivers State University in Port Harcourt, Nigeria. CFAL Nigeria's key areas are education transformation, SDG learning, sustainable cities, environmental sustainability, social development, focusing on Nigeria and neighboring countries. Nigeria is famous as the giant of Africa. I don't know, I thought that's wrong. Giant of Africa, being the most populous country on the continent and the largest economy thanks to their abundance of oil. Port Harcourt itself is the chief oil refining city in Nigeria. Nigeria's energy makeup consists of 45% biofuels and waste, and 32% oil and oil byproducts, 21% from natural gas, 1.1% from hydropower, and a tiny, tiny amount comes from coal. 77% of Nigeria's electricity comes from natural gas, 22% is hydropower, and 0.5% is solar. Due to Nigeria's vast oil resources and reliance on oil and gas for energy production, this webinar will focus on the dual challenge of maintaining economic stability while expanding domestic energy access through developing sustainable alternatives as global markets move away from fossil fuels. So for a bit of online housekeeping, this webinar has been advertised across two time zones. For some, it will be 9 a.m. in the morning, for others 6 p.m. in the evening, and some may be coming from time zones beyond that. We will be moving forward on the host CFAL's time, which is 9 a.m. Any references to time will be as such. For this webinar, we will have a Q&A feature at the end to close out our session. You can submit questions at any point. We will do our best to answer all questions, but if too many come through, we will only be able to answer as many as the time allows. We have a chat moderator with us today who will be monitoring communications to ensure everyone is safe and happy. The expected end time for this session is 10:30 a.m., inclusive of the Q&A. Our Q&A will not run past 10:30. We will also have a post-webinar feedback survey available. For those who have attended all three webinars, a CFAL certificate of participation will be emailed to your registered address, and a recording will also be available, so keep an eye out for that in your emails post-session. And I would like to now pass to Ayuma for introducing our panelists.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for being here today. It's great to have you all and here with us as we dive into this conversation on the politics of power. Energy is something we all rely on, and for our everyday use. It helps to move our cities, keep our economies running. Most of the time, we barely think about it until something goes wrong. But behind the switches and pipeline is a world that is deeply political. Our country is blessed with oil and gas or coal. These resources have shaped national identity, economic opportunity, and global influence. Last week, we were able to appreciate what Australia's journey so far, and this week we'll be diving into Nigeria. We've opened doors, created wealth, and built alliances. But they have also brought tough challenges, from environmental pressures to economic dependence and governance issues. And now, with the world racing towards cleaner energy, the stakes are even higher. Nations that rely heavily on fossil fuels are navigating major transitions, while global tensions and market shifts are shaping how countries think about energy security. Today, we will explore these dynamics through the lens of Nigeria, a country whose energy story captures both the promise and the complexity of this moment. I am excited about this moment, and I want to get started already. And I'm glad you are here to explore this with us. Let's begin. I would like to start by introducing our first speaker. He is Professor Augustine Ikien.
While we're waiting for that to load, I wonder if I think Newcastle and Nigeria are at two different ends of the scale. So your population is very young, and our population is rapidly aging. So a lot of Australians are not perhaps as concerned about transitioning to safe energy sources, renewable energy sources, as possibly young Nigerians are, because they're going to be inheriting the planet. I'm just wondering if you think that's going to shape the energy market. Iwoma or Udoak?
I'll allow Dr. Uduak speak. He's an energy economist, so maybe he'll have some insights for us.
Beautiful. Thank you. I can't believe I got you with the first question, Uduak.
Oh, okay. That's great. Thank you very much for the question. The demography of Nigeria, I think the median age is less than 24 years, which means it's young heavy.
That is incredibly young.
But the issue of energy transition in Nigeria, it's a very complex thing. And that is because, in my view, energy transition has to have very strong economic components, very strong social components, and environmental components. The energy sector in Nigeria, indeed, crude oil exploration, has not brought economic development or economic transformation. And so you have a country with abundance of crude oil, a country that it's a major player in the international crude oil markets, but on the other end, a country that has one of the highest number of people living in absolute poverty in the world. So I think for Nigeria, the focus would have to first be on economic transformation, which it's a very important step to be able to carry out any form of energy transition. You need the country has to be productive. So the level of structural and productive transformation of the country has to cut across different sectors. And it's with these productive capabilities that discussions on energy transition can be built upon. Nigeria hasn't reached that stage yet.
All right, there is a lot to unpack here. I have an awful lot of questions, but Isabel assures me right now that the video is good to go live.
Distinguished guests, respected scholars, energy professionals, development partners, students, ladies and gentlemen, I am deeply honored to address this important webinar hosted by SAIFO Nigeria on a timely and strategic subject of fossil wealth and the energy transition and Nigeria's energy future. This conversation is not merely about oil, gas, or renewable energy. It is fundamentally about the future of national development, economic stability, environmental stability, responsibility, technological adaptation, and the dignity of human life in Nigeria and across Africa and the rest of the world. Let me begin with this historical fact that there is a link between black gold, oil, and transatlantic slave trade. Across historical phases, black gold is conceptualized, broadly evolving across three key phases: the human capital slave trade during the transatlantic era. The labor value of black slaves made so much money for plantation owners that for the first time, it became to be known as black gold, where the Confederate America inscribed black slave into the Confederate currency. The Niger Delta was a major entrepot of slave shipment to Americas. This is the same region harbors most of the black gold in Africa. In the pre-oil era, Nigeria relied on export of agricultural commodities like palm oil, which was known as the palm gold, that offered lubricants to European industrial revolution. Thereafter, oil was discovered in Nigeria in 1956 in Oloibiri, in present-day Bayelsa State. Since then, crude oil has become a dominant strategic resource in the 20th and the 21st centuries. The Niger Delta is noted for the production of the liquid black gold in Nigeria. The global energy transition, therefore, presents Nigeria with both a challenge and an opportunity based on our long-standing strategic resource endowment and its location in West Africa. The challenge is clear. If nations that fail to strategically adapt may experience economic vulnerability, geopolitical marginalization, and even declining order of resource relevance. But the opportunity is equally profound. Countries that wisely manage the fossil fuel wealth while investing in sustainable transition pathways can build resilience economies, expand energy security, strengthen industrialization, and improve social development. The world is entering a new phase of geopolitical and economic transformation. The traditional dominance of fossil fuel is gradually evolving toward diversified energy systems driven by decarbonization, climate policies, technological innovation, and strategic competition over future energy markets. The dynamics of change in the world energy and geopolitics is unstoppable, and Nigeria must rise to acknowledge this. However, it is important to recognize a critical reality. The energy transition is not uniform across nations around the world. Developed economies, as you say, may accelerate renewable adaptation because of they already possess advanced infrastructure, industrial capacity, technological capital, and relatively stable electricity systems. Developing nations like Nigeria face more complex reality. For Nigeria, the challenge is not simply a transition away from fossil fuels. The greater challenge is how to use the existing fossil resources intelligibly to finance development, eradicate energy poverty, support industrial growth, and prepare for a sustainable future simultaneously. This distinction is extremely very important. Nigeria cannot afford energy abandonment in the name of transition. Rather, Nigeria must pursue an effective and manageable energy transformation strategy that balances economic realism with environmental responsibility that supports social and economic development. The question is, can fossil fuel resources still be a pathway to development? The answer is yes. The answer is yes because under strategic conditions, we can respond and say oil and gas can still serve as instruments of national development in the decarbonizing world if revenues properly managed and linked to productive transformation. For decades, petroleum exports have remained central to Nigeria's foreign exchange earnings and national revenue structure. Yet, dependence without diversification creates structural vulnerability. The future, therefore, demands a new philosophy of resource governance in the nations striving for proper resource should no longer be merely finance recurrent expenditures. We call for innovative revenue sharing system to ensure building an infrastructure along with social amenities so that majority of its people will have access to affordable energy. It means that the nation must ensure that social investment in human capital development, education, and technology innovation should remain a national priority. The countries that will succeed in the new energy era are not necessarily those with the largest fossil reserve, but those with the highest strategic intelligence in managing transitional dynamics. Nigeria, balancing export revenues with domestic energy access is another important area of interest. One of Nigeria's greatest contradictions is this. We export energy abroad while many citizens lack stable energy at home. A nation cannot sustainably pursue industrial growth while millions remain without reliable electricity access. Small businesses suffer, healthcare system weaken, educational development slow, rural economies stagnate. Nigeria must therefore balance export ambitions with domestic utilizational priorities. Energy policy must ultimately serve human development. The true measure of energy success is not only export revenue, but how it serves ordinary citizens in the polity. Gas is another strategic fuel or energy resource that Nigeria has plenty of it. Nigeria gas may become Nigeria's most strategic bridge between fossil dependence and sustainable transition. However, since oil industry began operation in the country, there has been persistent gas flaring. It is a fact that Nigeria possesses enormous gas reserve capable of supporting electricity generation and industrialization. There is need to expand domestic gas use to reduce biomass dependency for both urban and rural residents. It is also true that Nigeria's large gas endowment can be utilized to promote regional energy cooperation with sister African states. For Nigeria, gas should not merely be viewed as an export commodity. It should become a developmental catalyst for nation building. While we think ahead of the future direction of energy transition, we must stop to think first the environmental and human dimensions of the region that bears the burden of Nigeria's development, the oil-producing community or states of the Niger Delta. No discussion about Nigeria's energy future can ignore the experiences of communities in the Niger Delta. The region bears the limited crude gains and bears more of the crude pains of crude oil export dependence economy. Despite the fact that the region has been the hotbed of Nigeria's oil industry operation for over 70 years, it still suffers from the pangs of underdevelopment. These are the pains you can see from the pictures. The Niger Delta region experience environmental degradation, infrastructural deficit, pollution, youth unemployment, restiveness, and social instability. Notwithstanding our underdevelopment status, the Niger Delta still remains one of the most resource-rich regions in Africa. In fact, the most oil-producing region in sub-Saharan Africa. This reality raises a profound moral and political question. How can a region that sustains national energy wealth remain underdeveloped? To answer this question, Nigeria must correct its own internal contradiction if she must practice true federalism. Part of the contradiction is in the benefit sharing among the federated units. In the pre-oil era, revenue sharing was 50% for the producing area. And in the post-oil era, declined in three major principles position: land mass, population, and derivation principle. In the new oil era, the politics of revenue allocation plan was redefined and implemented on the basis of land mass, population, and derivation principle. In this plan, the Niger Delta oil producing areas or region was put in a disadvantageous position because their minority population, very limited land mass, cannot compete with the rest of the nation. And even the derivation principle was staged in declining order from 50% to 1.5% in 1992. And it was only the intervention of the then Nigeria military head of state, General Sani Abacha, that increased the derivation to 13% in application of the derivation principle in revenue sharing that affects the oil producing areas. That 13% is still on till this day. You can see the effects on that peculiarity on the oil producing states of Nigeria and what they earn. 2022 here is just an example. This special feature of controversy and rivalry maybe links to Judith Miller and Laura Merrill's 1990 book or observation that oil is the modern world heroine. The pleasure it provides fuels a way of life no other energy source can satisfy so plentifully and cheaply. Today, the trade in petroleum, like the traffic in drugs, is so much in the veins of nations that most countries, whether rich or poor, find their economies held hostage to this remarkable substance. Understand that the rivalry, greed, and competition to control oil resources in the international scene has its domestic equivalence in producer nations like Nigeria, in that there is fierce competition and rivalry among the diverse ethnic groups in the country to control the distribution of wealth. The rivalry and collusion of oil brings into the international competition and political power as its own domestic equivalent within the internal politics of producer nations like Nigeria, where the struggle to control nations' wealth derived from oil among the diverse ethnic group has the capacity to disintegrate otherwise unified diverse groups in the polity. What then is renewable energy and Nigeria's future? Renewable energy is no longer a distant aspiration. It is becoming an economic and strategic necessity. Nigeria possesses enormous renewable potential like solar energy across the regions and will create means for decentralized power solutions. Renewables can complement, not immediately replace Nigeria's existing energy structure. The future energy system will likely be hybrid, and emerging technologies help bridge energy access gaps between the rural areas and other unserved commodities around the country. And energy transition can also create opportunities for employment, technical education, and promotion of African technological advancement. Nigeria must therefore invest not only in energy consumption, but also for the current fuel fuel consumption pattern should be made affordable to all Nigerians. If needs be, all Africans. Nigeria can afford it. Nigeria will remain a formidable key player in Africa. No doubt about it. What does that mean? Let us remember and in fact think that any given era, irrespective of the ways of change in energy world order, Nigeria will ever be in the world oil dynamics and the geopolitics of energy transition by the virtue of our strategic resource endowment. So I repeat, Nigeria will remain a formidable key player in Africa and the world because the global energy transition will also reshape the international power relations. In conclusion, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, also know that oil wealth financed and built a new brand capital city called Abuja. Now, we all know now that strategic resource endowment, oil, wealth, has made Nigeria great. Thanks for listening, and I appreciate the opportunity to have addressed you from the Nigerian perspective. Bye for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. This is so enlightening. We apologize once more for the small technical hitches, and we'd like to go on with the webinar, and we're prepared to listen to Professor Kingsley Opara.
Thank you to CIFA UNITA Nigeria, and welcome distinguished colleagues, researchers, and global advocates to our series 2 of our webinar on fossil fuel, fossil wealth, and energy transition under the topic, the politics of energy power. Here we're going to examine one of the most enduring paradoxes of the modern energy area, where we're going to look at how the extraction of fossil wealth, how it has impacted negatively on the local communities and has systematically disempowered them, disenfranchised them, and degrade the local communities to a large extent. I am Professor Opara Kingsley, a lecturer from the Rivers State University, Institute of Geosciences and Environmental Management, and as well as the steering chair of Research, Innovation and Development Commission of Nigeria Summit Environmental Group. It's a pleasure to be here. Now, if you look at the Nigeria map you have there right now, you would see the region that is marked with red. That are about 9 states or 9 provinces, as it's being called in some other parts of the world. Those are the Niger Delta region of Nigeria. Niger Delta is one of the world's largest oil and gas producer. Now, it sits on a massive oil and gas reserve. For oil, it exceeds 37 million barrels of crude oil, while for gas, it has over 215 trillion cubic feet of natural gas. The region currently produces over 1.5 to 2 million barrels of crude oil per day, and giving it the position as the largest oil and gas producer or reserve nation in Africa. Now, the extraction or exploration or exploitation of oil and gas began in Olebri, which was formerly in Rivers State, currently Bayelsa, in 1956. The Niger Delta, since then, the Niger Delta has been the economic engine or the powerhouse of Nigeria. I'm saying that because of the data that state clearly that over 90% of Nigerian foreign exchange earnings and approximately 85% of government revenues are generated from this region. And that's where the issue comes, the paradox of this wealth, the paradox of the 4C wealth. Now, paradoxically, the local communities in the Niger Delta live under the constant glare of gas flarings, but remain in a near total electrical darkness, disconnected from the national grid. Now, currently, statistics holds it that more than 50% of the populations in Niger Delta do not have access to the national grid. The region houses over 31 million people across 9 states. Yet, this region that has all the major fossil wealth in this nation and that helps a lot of global economy experiences extreme systemic poverty, high unemployment, and severe developmental deficits. Now, decades, over 50 years of oil extraction have now transformed one of the best biological diverse wetland globally into one of the most polluted ecosystem on Earth. Now, still on that, the paradox of energy poverty now has made the Niger Delta to be socio-economically neglected, and then there's this chronic off-grid darkness in the Niger Delta. It also, the exploration or extraction of the fossil wealth has led to a lot of environmental toll. Now, over 50 years of the oil exploration has created a devastating legacy. Persistent oil spills. Now, record data have it that almost over 13 million oil spills has occurred in the region, and which have contaminated the aquatic environment, the terrestrial environment, rendering the traditional fishing and farming impossible. Now, also the routine gas flaring continues to release toxic pollutants into the adjacent resident area, leading to severe public health crisis, including respiratory disorder and higher child rates. These are some grant-sponsored research that we conducted in the Niger Delta region, and we discovered clearly that the polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbon, which is one of the major pollutants of oil and gas activities. So we did this research and discovered that the result we were getting, the value, the level of pollution, the level of contamination, the concentration of these pollutants were about one of the highest globally. And we further looked at the metrics of this polluted aquatic environment, such as the water as well as the biota, or what we call the seafood. And we discovered that the level of metrics was also very high globally. And we further also assessed another pollutant, which is the heavy metal, which is also another pollutant that is associated with oil activities. And we did that on the agricultural soils and some plants. And we discovered that the level of the heavy metal were also high, and the metrics was also very, very high. In fact, currently, one of our PhD students did a research on the assessment of heavy metal in seafoods in coastal regions in the Niger Delta. And alarming, some of the results were quite alarming. For instance, chromium was as high as 374, as against standard or limit values of 1.5. And lead was 67 as against 1, telling you how serious this problem has been. Now, some data from World Banks, we discovered that life expectancy for Niger Delta 49 years, as against 56 for Nigeria. Population below poverty line in Niger Delta was approximately 70% as against 46. And infant mortality rate approximately 20% as against 12. and access to natural grid less than 50% as against 55%. Now, talking about the politics of fossil wealth, who controls the politics? Basically, there are tripartite alliance of power, and that include the federal government of Nigeria, the international oil companies, the IOCs, and the local elites and traditional rulers. Now, basically, the federal government claims absolute ownership of all mineral resources under the Land Use Act of 1974 and the Petroleum Act of 1969 that has been amended in 2021. Now, for the international oil companies, they are major players and they wield immense political influence, especially as it has to do with shaping environmental regulatory frameworks and enforcement. Now, the legal frameworks as instrument of marginalization or defranchisation, one of it is the Land Use Act that eventually allows the state or the federal government to own all the land. Now, for the Petroleum Industry Act that was amended in 2021, it really did something that was quite remarkable, and we felt initially it was going to be a game changer by saying that 3% will be of amount generated will be given to the the communities, the local communities. However, the same PIA 2022 amended, the section 257, subsection 2, stripped the community of its funding allocation by saying that if there's any vandalization, the community will lose the 3%. Now, that effect is effectively turning an already impoverished community into unpaid security guards for states' assets. Now, eventually, these challenges and neglects over decades eventually led to what I want to call from peaceful activism to an armed struggle. It all started sometime in the early 90s by what is known as popularly known as the Ogoni Uprising that was led by Ken Saro-Wiwa and the Mosop sorting for environmental justice and resource control. All they were saying without arm was federal government let the communities in the Niger Delta control their resources. However, this was not well managed then by the then government, and so there was a brutal materialization that culminated into the execution of the Ogoni and eventual killing of Ken Saro-Wiwa. Now, this eventually did not really solve the problem, but rather escalated the problem as local communities began to resist in the early 20s with arms, and that led to the amend Niger Delta Avenger targeting oil infrastructures and destroying some of them. Now, eventually, that made the national security, the federal government to raise the national security for fossil assets. And that led to the establishment of the Joint Task Force, a combined military force whose primary mandate was to protect oil installation. Now, it was good, but however, the local communities were viewed and treated as potential security threats, which led to a lot of human rights violations, arbitrary arrests, and destruction of entire village, like the case of OOD. Now, one emerging and quite interesting, but yet a very paradox scenario that is coming from the operation of the fossil fuel or the exploitation or the exploration of the fossil fuel in the Niger Delta is the onshore divestment paradox. Now, there is a new phase of energy politics which is taking place. International oil majors are beginning to divest from onshore to offshore. And this is already causing unresolved liabilities, community resistance, and injustice gap. Now, these IOCs are doing this because of the pressure as a result of the global issues on decarbonization. And so it's beginning to lead to litigation in global court and all that. So they now prefer to move to offshore or deep water blocks where they think or they believe they face zero community interaction, lower security risks, and virtually no public scrutiny. However, the challenge with this is that the onshore assets are being sold to local domestic oil companies, which do not often have the capital, the technical expertise, and the international reputation sensitive to manage legacy pollutions, execute massive decommissioning, or funding long-term environmental remediation. This has left the community behind, as with a lot of unresolved environmental liabilities and no clear legal recourse as multinational entities exist the onshore space. Reemerging energy politics, the pathway to a just transition. Now, what's the pathway? First, I think there's need for ecological depth and mandatory remediation. Now, there is need to enforce a strict regulatory no-exit policy on divesting IOCs until they fully fund independent, audited ecological cleaning and decommissioning funds. Now, the other thing that can be done to help the communities also is to democratize the host community trust. And this can be done by removing the punitive vandalism clause that is in the PIA view as amended 2021, so that the communities can also have representative on the HCTD board. Now, the other thing is decentralized renewable energy. So that brings us to Nigeria Energy Transition Plan. Basically, the Nigeria Energy Transition Plan, Nigeria is doing well on that. So they consider the fact of net zero for 2060 goal. There's also the gas, using the using of gas as a pragmatic bridge, and then the universal energy access and the clean cooking pivots. Now, we did some evidence-based research in Nigeria to look at how beneficial and what is doable with the Nigeria as it has to do with solar, and we discovered that the Nigeria has what it takes to use or to transmit to solar. Now, there was, on the issue of solar and mini-grid expansion, at the rural level, there's a revolution that is being sponsored by the World Bank and in collaboration with Rural Electricity Agency of Nigeria. They are doing quite a lot of good work in most of the communities. Now, there's bound to be frictions in these transitions, and some of it has to do with the land and farming friction, as well as the economic bottlenecks. On the land and farming friction, the people are already, bothered about the Land Use Act of 1978, and then also the issue of high import tariffs and that. And then the 4 pillars of energy justice, if it has to be done well, it must be distributive, it must be recognitional, it must be procedural, it must be restorative. I want to say thank you for your attention, and God bless you.
So, Opara, and you have raised so many issues, and we have so many questions coming in. Finally, we move to our third speaker, Dr. Uduak Akpan, who will speak directly to the economics of oil and power. Dr. Uduak, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Ready when you are.
Yeah, okay. Thank you very much again. So the benefits of being the last speaker is that previous speakers have already set the context.
Yes.
So I would just perhaps just with a few numbers and
go straight to the economics.
Think of a possible solution. Okay, so if you could go to the next slide. Crude oil, it's the most traded commodity in the world in terms of volume and value, and that has been the case in the past 60 to 80 years. And crude oil, it's a very important factor in international geopolitics. Many conflicts in the world are connected to oil, including the current US-Israel versus Iran conflict. Oil plays a very important role in these conflicts. Nigeria has been a very important player in the oil and gas market in the world. The crude oil in Nigeria, located in the Niger Delta part of Nigeria, it's regarded as light and sweet, which essentially means it has a higher market premium than most of the other crude oil like Brent, like West WTI. And Nigeria also has a lot of natural gas and many other resources. The main question there is, how has Nigeria used these resources to promote economic development and long-term sustainability? So here we start by showing the picture on top. It's a picture of gas flaring in Nigeria. So in terms of environmental sustainability, the crude oil exploration in Nigeria has resulted in a whole lot of environmental destruction. And there is still a lot of gas flaring happening in Nigeria in 2023. About 183 billion standard cubic feet of natural gas was flared. There is a whole lot of oil spillage that has destroyed most parts of the Niger Delta, as previous speakers have already noted. Next slide, please. In terms of how this oil wealth has contributed to economic development at the macro level, what we see, it's a classic case of resource cost. Resource cost, is the phrase that describes a situation where countries that have enormous natural resources, instead of the resources to become a blessing to the country, instead of the resources to be used for economic development, the resources have turned to be a cost on the country in different areas. And there are economic mechanisms that lead to this resource costs, which we are going to highlight just briefly. But in terms of the indication of the resource cost, what we see here is that crude oil, Nigeria has essentially become a mono economy, an economy that is run on crude oil. In spite of the fact that crude oil contributes over 70% to export revenues, crude oil also has very little contribution to GDP, to value addition. The implication of this is that a whole lot of economic activities happen outside the crude oil industry, but government focuses mainly on the crude oil industry because that is where the money is coming from. And government has abandoned virtually every other sector, which means no policy, no support. Other sectors are struggling, including the agricultural sector that accounts for over 60% of employment in rural areas. And the focus of government is just on crude oil. But this crude oil has also not affected the life of the common person. So we see in the second chart that GDP per capita of Nigeria has remained almost the same since the 1990s. So in spite of all the crude oil wealth, the economic status of the average Nigerian has not changed. Next slide, please. In terms of the social implication of this crude oil, what we see, again, it's that Nigeria has emerged as one of the poorest, or one of the countries with the highest number of poor people in the world. and 56% of the country live in absolute poverty. And in some parts of Nigeria, the percentage of people in absolute poverty is over 70%, as we can see. So here, the picture is just trying to show that Nigeria has a very young population, and the population is poor. Next slide, please. So here we try to analyze the issue of natural resource endowments and economic development, and how natural resource endowments can lead to economic development. In this schematic diagram, we start by showing that natural resource endowments usually confer countries with comparative advantages in the export of those commodities. And the export of those commodities would yield government revenues through exports, through profit sharing, and through royalties. And they could be basic employment. But to really be able to move from just having revenues to productive transformation of the country, there are some very important things that must be in place. And the first of these factors, it's the character of the state. The character of the state has to be developmental and not a rentier state. In Nigeria, the character of the state is a rentier state, which it's only interested in rents from crude oil. Beyond the character of the state, it's the character of the firm or entity or the state-owned enterprise that has been tasked to manage this wealth on behalf of the country. And what we see is that in many other countries that have been able to use their natural resources to transform the country, the firm that manages these resources the firms have dual mandates. The first mandate that the firms have would be a commercial mandate, which means the firms have to operate commercially to extract resources and make profits. The second mandate that the firms have to have is a developmental mandate, which means the profits that the firm make from these resources must be used to strengthen every other part of the economy, must be used to invest in infrastructure and other factors that contribute to reducing the cost of doing business, to reducing the cost of entrepreneurship, to promoting technology, especially research and development. And it's only when this happens that natural resource abundance can move from just having comparative advantage to competitive advantage. And additional investments in research and development, in human capital development would transform the countries. And when this happens, the natural resource endowments of the firms of the country can be used to develop other industries. They could be forward and backward linkages to many other sectors and industries in the country. Next slide, please. So here we just try to highlight, compare what happens in Nigeria with what happens in Morocco, which is another African country. And the choice of Morocco, it's intentional because it's a country in Africa. We see that Nigeria has abundance of oil and gas. Morocco has abundance of phosphates. But unlike Nigeria, that the oil and gas resources have not been able to support the economic transformation of the country, in Morocco, the phosphate reserves have transformed the country, and the firm tasked with managing the phosphate reserve, the OCP Group, has footprints in all parts of the country and contributes to productive transformation of virtually all the sectors in the country. Next slide, please. So for Nigeria, how can oil and gas how can oil and gas resources support economic transformation of the country? And this it's important because we cannot discuss energy transition without having a country that has the productive capability to lead this transition. So the productive transformation of the country, it's an integral and a critical factor in any discussion about energy transition. So for Nigeria, the first thing should be how the oil and gas resources would support the economic transformation of the country. And here we are proposing that the petrochemical industry, which is directly linked to the petroleum crude oil industry, could be an important sector or industry to lead to this transformation. And also the natural gas industry could also be an important industry to lead to this transition. Next slide, please. But there are so many barriers. Previous speakers have highlighted several political barriers. I think that the major barrier is the political economic question, and the fact that the Nigerian states operate as a rentier state, where elites are more interested in primitive accumulation of wealth and not the development of the country. And so agreements, legal agreements, the mandates of the state, the mandates of state actors are mainly directed towards rent extraction and not to development, which means the first barrier that has to be addressed is changing the character of the states. And then the second is, again, the political economic question. Here we see a picture of showing the proponents of the largest refinery in Africa, saying that there are powerful groups that don't want the refinery to operate. So we cannot downplay the importance and the role of political economy or vested interest in the industry. And that has to be addressed frontally. And then finally, there is a lack of investments in critical infrastructure. Here, I just highlighted a newspaper article that stated that even the electricity grid collapsed over 100 times in the past 10 years, showing that without critical infrastructure, the issue of productive transformation would not be achieved. And when that cannot be achieved, Nigeria cannot transition, there cannot be energy transition in Nigeria. So I would stop here, believing that there will be other opportunities to expatiate on any other point. Thank you very much. This is the final slide. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Uduak. We're just trying to find the other two panelists. So in the interim, I'm really sorry, Uduak, you knew you were going to get a hard time when you logged on. And by pulling it all together, it seems like the separation of government resources for the use of the good of the state is a massive problem in Nigeria. Is there any, I want to say, recourse in the Constitution for addressing the wealth of the country has to be used for the state?
Okay. So the understanding is that in countries, so now I'm going to speak from a political economic perspective. In many countries, the nature of the political economy creates institutions. In some cases, there are formal institutions and there are informal institutions. There are unseen relationships that control power and resources that cannot be enforced through laws. So even though the Constitution states that the resources of the country have to be used for the development of the country, even though there are so many laws that try to provide guidance on how the resources of the countries need to be used for the development of the country. These exist in the formal institutional framework. The informal institutional framework is that you have many actors, powerful actors that operate, and these powerful actors are only interested in the control of rents from the resources. So it's difficult to enforce the law against these powerful actors. So essentially what you have, you have a dichotomy. You have a country that there is very high inequality. You have the super rich and the very poor, and basically nothing in between.
And I mean, just looking at the issue from a geological perspective, Africa is mind-bendingly rich. It's one of the richest geological places on Earth, and yet it has this immense bifurcation. Now, obviously, there are going to be reasons for it. How can the rest of the world act in any way to help the populations of these countries? Are there political actions that we can bring to bear? Or is this a moral, social conscience issue?
Okay, so yes, it's true that many countries in Africa have a whole lot of wealth. In fact, in the critical mineral energy transition discourse, countries like Congo, countries like Guinea, like South Africa, like Namibia feature very prominently. But incidentally, these countries have been in civil wars funded externally. So it mirrors the resource cost context. When countries have resources and the institutions in the countries have been weakened over time, it's difficult for these resources to be used because there are so many political actors, so many vested interests, local and foreign, in these countries. And that certainly is the case with Nigeria, where the oil and gas majors, ExxonMobil, and all the big oil and gas companies have vested interest in Nigeria. And that also explains why, for example, there was a BP Deep Horizon spill in 2010, spilling about 3.1 million barrels of oil. And it became a very major headline in the United States. And BP had to pay a whole lot of compensation. But oil spillage in Niger Delta, it's 4 times that amount. Yeah. But the structure has prevented any major form of compensation. And it's difficult to hold powerful players accountable.
Thank you, and I wish it was different. Is there was discussion earlier of decolonialization, and is it a coincidence that a lot of the countries that are having these issues have sort of were colonized, and now there's been a vacuum? And I'm asking that as a colonial outpost. We were colonized as well. Has that obviously not at all the same experience, but
my understanding of decolonization is that yes, there was political independence, but there were so many landmines put on the way to ensure that there would be economic dependency after the political independence. That's my understanding of the issue of colonialism and decolonialism. So Britain never left Nigeria, Belgium never left the Congo. They essentially changed the title. Instead of having a Britain in Nigeria as the head of state or head of government, they brought a Nigerian loyalist whose loyalty was to Britain and not to Nigeria to lead the country.
Thank you. I always leave these with way more questions than I entered with. Walma, you're back in the room. I'm ready to hand over to you. But thank you, Uduak. That was amazing. And to all three presenters, that was really mind-blowingly opening. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you once more. And can you hear me, please?
We can hear you. Uduak, can you hear Walma?
I can hear, yes.
Then
Yes.
fire away.
We still have some questions while we wait for the other two speakers to log in and answer the questions. Now, one of the questions here states that is trying to find out if the government should hold the IOCs accountable for some of these atrocities in the Niger Delta. Do you think they should be held account? And there are also listeners who are also bothered about the health implications and all that. When it comes to accountability, where does the buck stop?
Okay, in my view, we need to understand that there is a difference between having laws and being able to enforce laws. So Nigeria has lots of laws, but what's the need of having the laws if these laws cannot be enforced? It brings us to the issue of power. Should the government hold IOCs accountable? And the answer is yes. Can the government hold IOCs accountable? And the answer is, I think they have been trying, but they have seen that the IOCs are more powerful.
Thank you so much. We'll keep answering the questions. And the next question says, we have serious evidence-based finding that effects of this suffering and the rates of cancers from the said region is quite high. And everybody seems to be worried. How can crude oil producing communities in Nigeria benefit in terms of sustainable economic and infrastructural development? And we fear that the yardstick of land mass and population dynamics does not favor or host the host communities. And in terms of environmental sustainability, do we see fossil fuel complementing modern day renewable energy sources with respect to availability and reserves? You know, there are concerns now that since the communities are being shortchanged, will there really be anything that we're going to see in terms of development?
Oh, okay. First, it's that I mentioned the character of the states. And in Nigeria, the character of the Nigerian states, the federal and the states, that's the subnational, they have a rentier character. They are only focused on how to get resources, and not having a developmental character. So in most cases, the government is really not interested in development, and I'm saying that bluntly. So when that is the situation as it is in the case of many parts of Nigeria, it's difficult for the people to have any other alternative. The only alternative is to try to get the government or to try to institute a government that is interested in development and not a government that is interested in just getting revenues and, if possible, extracting the revenue from the country and putting it in other parts of the world. In terms of energy transition, my view is that transition is not an abstract concept. It has to be anchored on many things. It has to be anchored on the ability of countries and firms to produce things. Otherwise, we have a situation which we currently have in Nigeria that even the solar power, even the renewable energy products or that we have in Nigeria are all imported because Nigeria doesn't produce this. And because Nigeria doesn't produce this, the country has forfeited employment opportunities to gain knowledge of production systems, the opportunity to gain export revenues. So in my view, the energy transition has to be anchored on productive transformation, which itself has to be anchored on having key infrastructure and systems that support in industrial activities. So that's my view on that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Uduak. Augustine should be online and able to take questions. Woma, if you've got questions for Augustine, to let Uduak off the hook for a minute. He's been doing a champion job keeping this all together. Thank you, Uduak.
So Professor Ikien and Professor Opara, we welcome you to the panel, and we have some questions for you. You have gone through this several times. Professor Ikien even has a publication online with Eurobooks on world oil dynamics, where he has outlined the journey from local to international. And Professor Opara has done a lot of research. So Professor Ikien, you go first. One of the questions we have here is that of world accountability. Does the world really care? From your investigation, from your write-up, would you say that, because you ended your presentation that Nigeria, you were emphatic that Nigeria is strategic in the world oil dynamics. But do you think that they really care about the reality on ground? Professor Ikien, we would like to have a short, because we're nearing the end of the...
Listeners, we got to acknowledge the fact that irrespective of national and international differences, we have clear interdependencies. The oil industry, with their always intended self-interest at the expense of the masses that own the real resource. If care is taken over the oil producing areas in all phases of development, let me give you an example. A moderate oil producing state of Malaysia
They have utilized their oil resources to cater for their agricultural scenario, to create productivity at the grassroots. In advanced countries like Norway or in Alberta, they've been able to even establish post-oil era savings fund for the succeeding generation. The responsibility first must come from the corporate behavior. Then the government must stand up for its sovereign rights and responsibility for its population. And let me clarify something. It is often noted with, I believe, it's a misnomer, the idea of resource curse. There is no such thing as resource curse. Resource curse is like blaming the victim. If things are done properly, there is no curse. You minimize the social cost, you optimize the benefit for everybody who are all the players, I should say, in the oil industry. So if the world cares about, most of the multinationals come from advanced countries, and they sought partnership at the local level. If those partnership conditions built in with clear responsibility on part of the sovereign rights and part of the incoming multinational to understand the cultural, economic, indigenous economic system, they need to understand before they go inside. You don't go and destroy their economic system for your own benefit, and then you call it resource curse. You are the one causing the resource curse. There is no such thing as resource curse because you are blaming the victim.
Professor Parra,
do the right thing and we'll all benefit. Thank you.
Thank you. Professor Parra, you talked so much about the effect on communities. And do you see any improvement in the last, or going forward, do you see any improvements coming in future or any reprieve for the oil producing communities? Do you think, or do you even think that these oil producing communities also have a responsibility to see that their lot is better? What do you think? Is there any hope in the new laws, any future? Please let us know from your research, because you've done quite extensive work. Professor Parra also has a lot of knowledge in environmental health and done a lot of research at the Rivers State University on environmental health. So do you see any way forward, future improvement or reprieve for the oil company or your communities?
In recent times, since for example, Nigeria has established
sorry, Professor King. Sorry, the question was for Professor Parra.
Okay, Parra, go ahead, please.
Yeah.
Yes.
Going forward, do you see a future for the oil producing communities that they will begin to benefit from their resource? Do you see any future 10, 20 years from now? You see any improvements based on your research as an environmental scientist?
My answer is both yes and no. And I want to start with the no. If the government continue to do the things the way they are doing it, if the OIC continues what they are doing, then there is no future. Rather, there will continue to be crisis because the community will continue to resist. Unfortunately, the enabling laws actually disfavors the communities, the producing communities. Now, like I did mention, in the PIA bill, or act rather, that was amended in 2021, there's a clause there. Even at the board where the 3% is being shared, the community is not represented. They don't make inputs. They don't say anything. So if this continues the way they are going, then we should be getting ready for more crisis. Now, you remember when I did talk about it from, what do you call it? Amicable dialogue down to armed struggle. Now, Ken Saro-Wiwa started with amicable dialogue and he was killed. And today it has moved to armed struggle. From armed struggle, the recent one that happened, we discovered that there was artisanal refineries. And artisanal refineries, we're doing a research currently on it. The air is highly polluted. In those communities that were affected, the soil is polluted. And these are things that will last for a very long time and need remediation. The last time we checked, though the federal government has put in place HYPREP, good and fine, but HYPREP, it's doing their best. But the percentage so far in the remediation of Ogoni land alone is not sufficient. And that was what directed us to do some searches in other parts of Rivers State, in Niger Delta. And we discovered that Ogoni land is just one of such, impacted community. Others, some are even more impacted. Nothing is being done. The case is getting worse. So that's why I said no. If the government, the federal government continue, except things are changed. Except the federal government changes the way they go around with the policies and be fair enough to the communities, the local communities, then it will be fine. Yes, for when you say whether the community has something to do. For instance, the issue of vandalization of equipment and all that, to a large extent, yes, the community could help, but I think it's a government property. So government should be able to secure their property with the assistance of the community, carrying the community along, not to leave the whole well infrastructures for the full protection of the community. These are people that are not armed. What strength do they have to, do those vandalization? For instance, I give you a scenario. I don't know, I think Prof was in that panel, where a government agency accused the community of vandalizing, deliberate vandalization of oil well infrastructure, only to discover that that government agency never visited the site, but rather was working with the report given to them by the IOC. So if this continues this way, then we don't have, but if we can begin to think, and not just making the money from oil, but become fair enough and listen to the people. Resource control for me will solve the problem. Like Prof said when he made his presentation, pre the oil area, you discovered it was 50%. Suddenly, when the post-oil area, it came down to 13%. No, it's not fair to the communities. I think if they do that, we'll go a long way to really solve the problem. And then maybe to add that there will be need actually for more monitoring, both biomonitoring, where the communities, the residents in those communities, their blood samples, their human samples are collected and used to analyze the level of these pollutants in their system. Because there is a high prevalence level of cancer, and most of these pollutants are cancerous. They are cancerous. And then that aside, that they also need to begin to look at the environment, because even the things they eat, like I mentioned in one of the research we just did recently, where chromium is 374 milligram per kg, as against 1.5 milligram per kg. That's alarming. And people eat this thing every day. So I think the government need to change, the IOC need to change their style, and then the community too should take some responsibilities to actually ensure that those people who vandalize maliciously or selfishly for their own benefit, the community should stop them. Thank you.
Thank you, Profs. We are getting set to round up, but just before we go, we have one interesting question from Professor Mbalisi, who is wondering how environmental education can be strengthened for increased understanding of the impact of oil extraction and other extractive activities on the environment. Do you think that the Niger Delta should prioritize environmental education? Prof, one minute, just answer. Prof Etienne,
Yes.
do you think that environmental education for the locals, it should be prioritized right now? 1 minute.
There is a principle called the right to know.
Mm-hmm.
And the communities are not made aware of the implication. They simply rush in, do their exploration, take the resource out and disappear and left the community to their own fate. When you create environmental awareness and you know the cost implication, then there will be care orientation on part of the communities to understand the implication, the basis for which there will be facilities to take care of them. But that is not what is happening. It is when the spill and the outcome with a lot of negative externalities, deadly ones, that is the time we engage in what I call, a reactionary approach to the solution, and the solution leaves never a solution. It lingers on, and today so many places are still polluted. And let me just conclude by saying that the oil companies, particularly the IOCs, now they are offshore. What they messed up on onshore, the young oil companies cannot afford it. They know it. And the world powers, and Nigeria should take their own sovereign responsibility to make the IOCs clean the Niger Delta environment. Don't beat them with resource costs. Thank you.
Professor, but one last word. Do you are in the university community, do you think enough is being done to educate the young people? We have a very large population of young people. In fact, it's projected that by 2050, that Nigerians will overwhelm the whole of Africa. Do you think that we are doing enough in the university system to bring this to light? Just 1 minute.
Yes, I would want to say we're not doing enough yet. And the reason is very clear. We need to look at our curriculums again, especially for university students, both graduates and postgraduates. We need to amend the curriculum to actually include courses that would help to create awareness. And then we should go beyond that, even to the secondary level, down to the primary level, including the curriculum, begin to create this awareness. And then we should also go beyond that. Agencies like NDDC and other government agencies should also begin to create awareness at the community level of the impacts of vandalizing when that happens, or the impact of artisanal refinery on even the people carrying out those activities. Because if the people understand the impact and the effect it has on their health, and that the possibility already, like you saw in my presentation, that Niger Delta life expectancy is already 49. And the tendency is that if things continue the way they are going, it will keep decreasing. So when people understand that, and I think that is being done, we'll be there, but we're not there yet. But I'm very optimistic that if the governments, the IOCs, they too can come in, the government agencies and the communities, as well as the tertiary institutions or the academia, coming in, doing more researches, creating more awareness, will eventually get there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Brody. I'm now signing back to you for the closing formalities. Thank you very much.
Thank you to all of our panelists. If there's anything that I've learned from today, it's that we need to keep this going, and we need to be hearing more from you, and the world needs to be hearing more from you, because as recent populism has shown, people react to noise. So I'll be working with Iwoma and Amelia, who's in CIFAR Surrey, and to keep this going. to keep this conversation and to keep Nigerian voices being heard among the general din of voices. Those the presentations for today were mind-blowingly excellent. More people need to hear them. And I think we all need to work together to keep that going. It's our job to support you, and we're not going anywhere. So we're with you on this one. All right. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. It's been, like I said, a journey, and it's been somewhat of an incredible ability for everyone to hang on after all of these technical difficulties. So we'll bring it all home next week. Finish up. Thank you so much, Woma. Thank you, Uduak. Thank you, Professor Kingsley, and to Professor Ikien. And we'll see you all same time, same channel, hopefully with less unusual technical interruptions next week. Mustafa and Amelia, get ready.
Thank you.
Have a lovely day, everyone.
Thank you all. Thank you, speakers.
Thank you so much.